Sarah Martinez had always dreamed of joining the elite rescue squad, but nobody expected her to actually make it through the selection process. At 24, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a noticeable limp that had been with her since childhood. The limp was the result of a car accident when she was 8 years old, which left her right leg slightly shorter than her left and caused her to walk with an uneven gait that became more pronounced when she was tired or stressed. The day she walked into the training facility for the first time, whispers followed her every step. The other recruits were predominantly male, tall, and looked like they had been carved from stone. They had military backgrounds, college athletics experience, or came from families of firefighters and paramedics. Sarah, on the other hand, worked as a night shift nurse at the local hospital and had been saving money for 3 years just to afford the training program fees. "Look at that," she heard one recruit mutter to another as she passed by. "They're really lowering the standards these days." The comment stung, but Sarah kept walking toward the registration desk, her jaw set with determination. She had heard worse comments throughout her life, and each one had only made her more resolved to prove that her disability did not define her capabilities. The training instructor, Captain Rodriguez, was a weathered man in his 50s who had seen everything. In his 25 years with the rescue service, he looked at Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and concern when she handed in her paperwork. "You sure you're ready for this, Martinez?" he asked, not unkindly. "This isn't going to be easy, and I won't be giving anyone special treatment." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I don't want special treatment, sir. I just want a fair chance to prove what I can do." Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly, making a note on his clipboard. He had learned long ago not to judge people by their appearance, but he couldn't help wondering if this young woman understood what she was getting herself into. The first week of training was brutal for everyone. The program was designed to push recruits to their physical and mental limits, testing everything from cardiovascular endurance to problem-solving under pressure. Each morning began with a 5-mile run through the hills surrounding the training facility, followed by obstacle courses, rope climbing, and strength training exercises that left even the fittest recruits gasping for breath. Sarah struggled more than most during those first few days. Her limp became more pronounced as fatigue set in, and she often finished the morning run several minutes behind the pack. The other recruits would already be starting their next exercise while she was still making her way to the finish line, breathing heavily and trying not to show how much pain she was in. During lunch breaks, she would sit alone at a corner table, icing her right leg and reviewing the training manual while the others socialized and joked around. She could hear their comments about her performance, how she was holding back the group, how she probably wouldn't make it through the first month. Some of the remarks were cruel, mocking her uneven gait and suggesting that she was only there to fill some kind of diversity quota. One afternoon, during a particularly challenging rope climbing exercise, Sarah fell twice while attempting to reach the top. Each time she hit the mat, a few recruits snickered, and one loudly wondered why she was even bothering to try. Sarah got up each time, dusted herself off, and attempted the climb again. On her 4th try, her arms shaking with exhaustion, she finally made it to the top and rang the bell. The applause was sparse and half-hearted, but Sarah didn't care. She had done it, and that was what mattered. As she rappelled down, she caught Captain Rodriguez watching her with an unreadable expression on his face. He made another note on his clipboard, but this time Sarah thought she detected something that might have been approval in his eyes. That evening, Sarah returned to her small studio apartment, exhausted and discouraged. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror, noting the bruises on her arms and legs, the way her right hip ached from overcompensation during the day's exercises. For a moment, she wondered if the other recruits were right, if she was fooling herself into thinking she could compete with people who seemed naturally gifted for this kind of work. But then she remembered why she had started this journey in the first place. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, she had seen too many people give up on their dreams because others told them they weren't good enough. Her own mother had worked 3 jobs to support the family after Sarah's father left, never complaining, never accepting that their circumstances had to define their future. Sarah had promised herself that she would never let anyone else's limitations become her own. She pulled out a notebook, and began writing down observations from the day's training, noting which exercises had been most difficult for her, and brainstorming ways to improve her technique. If natural ability wasn't going to be enough, she would have to be smarter and work harder than everyone else. She would study every manual, analyze every technique, and find ways to compensate for her physical limitations with superior knowledge and preparation. The next morning, Sarah arrived at the training facility 30 minutes early. She used the extra time to practice the exercises that had given her the most trouble the day before, working on her form and building the muscle memory that would help her perform better when fatigue set in. She was still at it when the first of the other recruits began to arrive, and she caught a few of them watching her with surprise. Captain Rodriguez arrived just as the official training session was beginning, and he noticed Sarah's early morning practice routine. He didn't say anything, but Sarah saw him make another note on his clipboard, and she allowed herself a small smile. She might not be the fastest or the strongest recruit in the program, but she was determined to be the most prepared. 3 weeks into the program, the training had claimed its first casualties. 4 recruits had already dropped out, unable to handle the physical demands and mental pressure. The remaining 22 candidates had begun to form alliances and study groups, but Sarah remained largely on the outside, still viewed as the weakest link who probably wouldn't last much longer. The mockery had become more subtle, but no less cutting. During group exercises, she would often find herself partnered with whoever was left over rather than chosen by anyone. When teams were selected for competitive drills, she was invariably picked last, with the team captain barely hiding their disappointment at being stuck with her. The other recruits had developed nicknames for each other based on their strengths, but Sarah was simply ignored or referred to dismissively as the nurse when they thought she couldn't hear. However, Sarah had been quietly observing and learning. While the others relied on their natural physical abilities, she had been developing a systematic approach to every aspect of the training. She had memorized every section of the emergency procedures manual and had started carrying a small notebook, where she recorded techniques that worked for different body types and situations. During medical training sessions, something began to shift. The instructor, Dr. Patricia Chen, was teaching advanced first aid and trauma response, subjects that were completely new to most of the recruits. While her classmates struggled to remember the steps for treating various injuries, Sarah found herself automatically knowing the procedures from her nursing background. When Dr. Chen asked for volunteers to demonstrate CPR techniques, most recruits hesitated, afraid of making mistakes in front of their peers. Sarah raised her hand immediately. As she performed the chest compressions with perfect rhythm and technique, explaining each step clearly to the group, she noticed several recruits paying attention to her for the first time since training began. "Excellent technique, Martinez," Dr. Chen commented. "Has everyone else been taking notes? This is exactly how it should be done." Sarah felt a surge of confidence she hadn't experienced since the training began. For once, she wasn't the one struggling to keep up. The next day brought water rescue training at the local lake. The recruits would have to swim a quarter-mile in full gear, then perform rescue techniques on a simulated drowning victim. Most of the muscular recruits who had dominated the land-based exercises suddenly looked less confident as they struggled. With the added resistance of waterlogged equipment, Sarah had learned to swim as part of her physical therapy after the accident that caused her limp. Her orthopedic doctor had recommended swimming as a low-impact way to build strength and improve her mobility. Years of regular swimming had given her excellent water skills and remarkable endurance in aquatic environments. As the group entered the water, Sarah's limp became completely irrelevant. In the water, her shorter leg was no disadvantage, and her years of compensatory muscle development actually gave her better balance and control. She moved through the water with surprising grace and speed, quickly establishing herself among the lead swimmers. When they reached the halfway point, several of the strongest land-based performers were already struggling. The bulky muscle mass that served them well in weightlifting became a liability in the water, and their technique was inefficient and energy-consuming. Sarah, meanwhile, maintained a steady rhythm, her movements economical and smooth. By the time they reached the rescue point, Sarah was among the first 5 swimmers to arrive, ahead of recruits who had consistently outperformed her in every previous exercise. The mock victim was a training dummy weighted to simulate an unconscious adult, and each recruit had to demonstrate proper water rescue techniques while maintaining their own safety. Many of the recruits struggled with this portion of the exercise. Their technique was clumsy, they fought against the water instead of working with it, and several had to be assisted by the safety divers when they became exhausted. Sarah approached the dummy with confidence, using techniques she had practiced countless times during her therapy sessions. She secured the victim properly, established a strong towing grip, and began the swim back to shore. Her movements were efficient and controlled, and she maintained a steady pace that allowed her to conserve energy for the full distance. As she swam, she could hear Captain Rodriguez calling out instructions to the other recruits, but his voice carried a different tone when he spoke to her. "Good form, Martinez. Steady as she goes." The encouragement was the first positive feedback she had received from the captain, and it energized her for the final stretch to shore. When Sarah reached the beach, she was the third recruit to complete the exercise successfully. She helped drag the dummy onto the sand and immediately began demonstrating proper recovery position techniques, drawing on her medical training to explain why each step was important for the victim's safety. Several recruits who were still struggling in the water looked toward shore and saw Sarah calmly explaining rescue procedures to the early finishers. For the first time, she wasn't the one being helped or lagging behind. She was leading by example, and her classmates were starting to take notice. As the last of the recruits completed the water rescue exercise, Captain Rodriguez gathered the group for debriefing. He went through the performance statistics, noting who had completed the swim in the fastest times, who had demonstrated the best technique, and who had shown the most improvement from previous water training sessions. "Martinez," he called out, consulting his stopwatch. "Third fastest completion time overall, and the most technically sound rescue technique of the day. Outstanding work." The group fell silent, and Sarah felt every pair of eyes turned toward her. Some looked surprised, others impressed, and a few seemed to be reassessing their previous assumptions about her abilities. After the debriefing, as the recruits were packing up their gear, a few of them approached Sarah for the first time since training had begun. James Peterson, one of the strongest performers in physical training, struck up a conversation about swimming technique. Maria Gonzalez, who had been struggling with the water exercises, asked if Sarah might be willing to share some tips. For the first time in weeks, Sarah found herself included in the post-training conversations instead of eating lunch alone. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was noticeable. The openly mocking comments stopped, and she began to sense a grudging respect from at least some of her classmates. The midpoint evaluation arrived in the 6th week of training, and it would determine which recruits would continue to the advanced phase of the program. Half of the remaining candidates would be eliminated based on their cumulative performance across all areas of training. The pressure was intense, and everyone knew that their dreams of joining the elite rescue squad hung in the balance. Sarah had been gradually improving in her weaker areas while maintaining her strengths in medical training and water rescue. Her early morning practice sessions had become a routine that several other recruits had begun to copy, arriving early to work on their own problem areas. She had developed better techniques for managing the physical challenges posed by her limp, finding ways to modify her approach without compromising the effectiveness of the exercises. The evaluation consisted of 3 major components spread across 2 days. The first day would test physical fitness and technical skills, while the second day would focus on problem-solving scenarios and team leadership challenges. Each recruit would be scored individually, but they would also be evaluated on their ability to work effectively as part of a team. During the morning fitness test, Sarah's improvements were evident. Her 5-mile run time had dropped by nearly 3 minutes since the beginning of training, and while she still wasn't the fastest in the group, she was no longer finishing last. More importantly, her technique on the obstacle course had become much more efficient, and she completed the rope climbing exercise on her first attempt. The technical skills portion included equipment handling, knot tying, and emergency procedure demonstrations. Sarah's meticulous study habits paid off as she flawlessly executed each required technique. Her knot work was precise and quick, Her equipment handling was smooth and confident, and her emergency procedure demonstrations were textbook perfect. When the scores were posted that evening, Sarah found herself ranked 8th out of the remaining 18 recruits. It wasn't the top of the class, but it was a solid middle-tier position that surprised many of her classmates. More significantly, she had scored in the top 3 for technical skills and emergency procedures, areas that would be crucial in real rescue situations. The second day brought the leadership and problem-solving challenges, which would test the recruits' ability to think clearly under pressure and guide teams through complex scenarios. Each recruit would take turns leading a team through a simulated emergency situation while being evaluated on their decision-making, communication, and ability to utilize their team members' strengths. When Sarah's turn came to lead, she was presented with a scenario involving a multi-vehicle accident with several casualties of varying severity. She had 15 minutes to assess the situation, organize her team, and execute a rescue plan while instructors created realistic complications and time pressures. Sarah approached the scenario methodically, drawing on both her nursing experience and her intensive study of rescue procedures. She quickly triaged the casualties, identifying the most critical cases and assigning team members based on their individual strengths. She placed James Peterson with his physical strength on heavy lifting duties, while assigning Maria Gonzalez, who had excellent communication skills, to coordinate with the simulated emergency services. As the scenario unfolded, Sarah demonstrated a calm composure that impressed the evaluators. When one of the casualties suddenly went into cardiac arrest, she smoothly redirected her team while beginning CPR herself. When a structural collapse blocked their primary evacuation route, she quickly identified an alternative path and reorganized the rescue effort without panic or confusion. Throughout the exercise, Sarah's communication was clear and decisive. She gave specific instructions, checked on her team members' progress, and adapted her plans as new challenges arose. Her team responded well to her leadership, and they completed the scenario with all casualties successfully evacuated within the time limit. After each recruit completed their leadership scenario, Captain Rodriguez announced that they would have one final challenge before the evaluations were complete. The entire group would work together on a complex rescue simulation that would require them to utilize all of their training and work as a cohesive team. The scenario was a simulated building collapse with multiple trapped victims at various levels and locations. The recruits would need to coordinate search and rescue operations, medical treatment, and structural safety assessments simultaneously. It was the most complex challenge they had faced, and success would require every team member to contribute their best efforts. Sarah found herself naturally taking on a coordination role, helping to organize the various rescue teams and ensuring that medical resources were allocated efficiently. Her nursing background made her invaluable in assessing the severity of injuries and prioritizing treatment, while her systematic approach to problem-solving helped keep the overall operation organized. As the simulation progressed, Sarah noticed that one of the victims was trapped in a space that was too small for any of the larger recruits to access safely. The opening was in an unstable area where the wrong movement could cause additional collapse, but the victim was in critical condition and couldn't wait for specialized equipment to arrive. Without hesitation, Sarah volunteered to attempt the rescue. Her smaller size and her experience with tight spaces from her childhood physical therapy sessions made her the logical choice, but it would be dangerous. She would need to crawl through a partially collapsed corridor, stabilize the victim, and coordinate their extraction, all while working in a space barely large enough for one person. Captain Rodriguez initially hesitated to approve the attempt, but Sarah's confidence and the logic of her plan convinced him to give her the go-ahead. She carefully made her way through the debris, using techniques she had learned during confined space training to move safely through the unstable area. When she reached the trapped victim, Sarah found that the simulation was more realistic than she had expected. The training dummy was positioned in a way that made extraction extremely difficult, and the space was filled with smoke effects that made visibility poor. She had to work largely by feel, using her medical training to assess the victim's condition, while figuring out how to safely move them. Sarah's systematic approach served her well in the cramped, chaotic conditions. She methodically checked for injuries, stabilized the victim's position, and rigged a harness system that would allow the team outside to help with extraction. Her calm communication kept the team informed of her progress and helped coordinate the delicate extraction process. When she finally emerged from the debris with the victim secured for transport, the entire group of recruits had gathered to watch. As Sarah handed off the victim to the medical team, she realized that something had fundamentally changed in the way her classmates looked at her. The skepticism and dismissiveness were gone, replaced by genuine respect and admiration. Captain Rodriguez approached her as she was cleaning debris from her equipment. "That was exceptional work, Martinez," he said, his usual stern expression softened by what might have been a smile. "You showed real leadership in there, and more importantly, you showed courage. That's what separates good rescuers from great ones." As the recruits gathered for the final debriefing of the evaluation period, Sarah felt a confidence she hadn't experienced since the training began. She had proven to herself and to others that her worth wasn't determined by her physical limitations, but by her knowledge, preparation, and determination to excel despite the challenges she faced. The results of the midpoint evaluation were posted on a Friday morning, and the atmosphere in the training facility was tense as recruits gathered around the bulletin board. 9 names appeared on the continuation list, while 9 others would be eliminated from the program. Sarah's heart pounded as she scanned the list, searching for her name among those who would move forward to the advanced training phase. There it was, 5th from the top, Martinez, Sarah Elena. She had not only survived the cut, but she had earned a position in the upper half of the continuing recruits. The relief and joy she felt were overwhelming, but she tried to maintain her composure as she saw the devastation on the faces of those who hadn't made it. Among those eliminated was Derek Wilson, one of the recruits who had been most vocal in his criticism of Sarah's abilities during the early weeks of training. He stared at the list in disbelief, unable to accept that the woman he had mocked for her limp had outperformed him when it mattered most. Several other physically imposing recruits who had seemed like sure bets for advancement were also absent. From the continuation list, Captain Rodriguez addressed the remaining 9 recruits with unusual solemnity. "You've made it through the selection phase, but now the real work begins. The advanced training phase will test everything you think you know about rescue operations, and it will push you beyond what you believed were your limits. The next 6 weeks will determine who among you has what it takes to join the elite rescue squad." The advanced phase immediately proved to be a different kind of challenge. The focus shifted from basic physical conditioning to complex tactical scenarios that required not just strength and endurance, but intelligence, creativity, and the ability to remain calm under extreme pressure. The training scenarios became increasingly realistic and dangerous, with real consequences for mistakes. Sarah discovered that the systematic approach and attention to detail that had helped her compensate for her physical limitations were now becoming major advantages. While some of the remaining recruits struggled to adapt from the straightforward physical challenges of basic training to the mental complexity of advanced scenarios, Sarah found herself thriving in the new environment. The first major challenge of advanced training was a 3-day wilderness survival and rescue exercise. The recruits were dropped in teams of 3 into remote terrain with minimal equipment and told to navigate to specific coordinates where they would find a simulated emergency situation. They would need to survive in the wilderness, reach their destination on schedule, and successfully complete a complex rescue operation with limited resources. Sarah was teamed with Marcus Thompson, a former Marine with excellent survival skills, and Angela Foster, a rock climbing instructor with outstanding physical conditioning. On paper, it looked like Sarah would be the weak link in the team, but her partners had learned to respect her problem-solving abilities and were willing to see how her unique skills might contribute to the mission. The terrain was challenging, with steep hills, dense forest, and several river crossings that tested everyone's physical limits. Sarah's limp became more pronounced during the long hiking periods, but she had developed excellent endurance and proved capable of maintaining the team's pace over the multi-day exercise. More importantly, Sarah's systematic approach to problem-solving became invaluable when the team faced navigation challenges and resource management decisions. When Marcus wanted to take a direct route over a steep ridge, Sarah studied the topographical map and identified a longer but safer path that would save energy and time. When Angela suggested setting up camp in an exposed area with a good view, Sarah pointed out the weather signs indicating potential storms and recommended a more sheltered location. On the second day, the team encountered their first major crisis when Marcus stepped through a concealed hole and suffered a serious ankle injury. He was unable to walk without assistance, and they were still 12 hours away from their objective. Some teams might have considered abandoning the mission or calling for emergency evacuation, but Sarah saw the situation as a problem that could be solved with the right approach. She quickly assessed Marcus's injury using her medical training and determined that while painful, it was not severe enough to require immediate evacuation. She then designed a support system using their limited supplies that would allow Marcus to continue moving with assistance. More importantly, she reorganized their route plan to find a path that would minimize the walking required while still reaching their destination on time. The modified plan required the team to use rope techniques to descend into a ravine rather than hiking around it, an approach that was technically more difficult but would cut several miles off their journey. Angela's rock climbing expertise was essential for setting up the descent system, while Sarah's knowledge of medical evacuation techniques helped them safely lower Marcus down the steep terrain. By the time they reached their objective, the team was exhausted but had arrived on schedule, and with all members in condition to attempt the rescue scenario. The situation they found was a simulated rock climbing accident, with 2 victims trapped on a cliff face, one unconscious, and one with suspected spinal injuries. This was exactly the kind of complex, multifaceted emergency that separated advanced rescuers from basic first responders. The team needed to assess the structural stability of the cliff, establish secure anchor points for rope systems, provide medical care to victims who couldn't be moved safely, and coordinate a technically difficult extraction operation, all while working in a dangerous environment. Sarah found herself naturally taking charge of the medical aspects of the operation while coordinating the overall rescue plan. Her nursing experience was invaluable in assessing the victims' conditions and determining the safest methods for moving them, while her systematic training approach helped her organize the complex sequence of steps required for a successful evacuation. Working with limited equipment and a partially injured team member, Sarah had to be creative in her solutions. She improvised medical stabilization equipment from their climbing gear, established communication procedures that kept all team members informed of the evolving situation, and coordinated the timing of the extraction to minimize risk to both victims and rescuers. The rescue operation took nearly 6 hours to complete, but both victims were successfully evacuated without additional injury. When the evaluators reviewed the team's performance, they noted that Sarah's leadership had been crucial to the mission's success, and her ability to adapt standard medical procedures to field conditions had been particularly impressive. As the three-day exercise concluded and the teams returned to the training facility, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed in her relationship with the program and her fellow recruits. She was no longer seen as the underdog who might not make it through training. Instead, she was recognized as a valuable team member whose unique combination of skills made her an asset in complex emergency situations. The respect she had earned was evident in the way other recruits now sought her input during planning sessions and deferred to her judgment on medical matters. More significantly, Captain Rodriguez had begun giving her additional responsibilities during training exercises, treating her as one of the most reliable and capable recruits in the program. As the final week of training approached, the 9 remaining recruits faced their ultimate test, a comprehensive emergency response simulation that would replicate the conditions and pressures of a real-world disaster. The scenario was designed to test every skill they had learned while pushing them to their absolute limits physically, mentally, and emotionally. The setup was elaborate and realistic. A simulated earthquake had collapsed a portion of a training building, creating a multi-level rescue situation with numerous casualties, structural hazards, and time-critical decisions. The recruits would work as a complete team, but each would also be evaluated individually on their specialized contributions and leadership capabilities. Captain Rodriguez briefed the team on the scenario parameters, but he warned them that conditions would change throughout the exercise as new complications arose. They would need to adapt their plans continuously while maintaining safety protocols and ensuring that no victims were overlooked or abandoned due to the pressure of time constraints. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as the team prepared for the final simulation. This was everything she had been working toward for 3 months, and her performance over the next 8 hours would largely determine whether she achieved her dream of joining the elite rescue squad. As the simulation began, Sarah quickly established herself in the command structure that emerged among the team. Her medical expertise made her the natural choice for triage coordinator, but her proven problem-solving skills also led to her taking on a broader role in strategic planning and resource allocation. The first major challenge came when the team discovered that the simulated building collapse had created several separate zones of trapped victims, each requiring different rescue approaches and specialized equipment. The team would need to divide their resources and work simultaneously on multiple fronts while maintaining communication and coordination between the various rescue operations. Sarah found herself assigned to lead the medical response team while also serving as the primary coordinator between the different rescue groups. It was a demanding role that required her to maintain awareness of the overall situation while making critical decisions about patient care and evacuation priorities. The terror scenario became increasingly complex as time progressed. Simulated aftershocks created new hazards and forced the team to evacuate some areas they had been working in, while the discovery of additional victims required constant revision of their resource allocation and tactical plans. One particularly challenging situation arose when the team discovered a victim trapped in a space that could only be accessed through a damaged ventilation system. The passage was narrow, unstable, and filled with simulated smoke that made visibility extremely poor. Moreover, the victim was unconscious and would require immediate medical attention once reached. Several team members volunteered for the dangerous crawl through the ventilation system, but Sarah realized that her smaller size and medical training made her the logical choice for the mission. The passage would be too tight for most of the team members, and she would be able to begin medical treatment immediately upon reaching the victim. The crawl through the damaged ventilation system was one of the most challenging physical tasks Sarah had ever attempted. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders, and she had to navigate around twisted metal and debris while carrying medical supplies and maintaining radio communication with her team. Her limp, which had been such a source of embarrassment and difficulty during the early weeks of training, became almost irrelevant in the confined space where everyone would have had to crawl regardless of their physical condition. Her years of physical therapy had actually given her excellent upper body strength and flexibility that served her well in the cramped conditions. When Sarah reached the trapped victim, she found a complex medical situation that required quick thinking and creative solutions. The victim had multiple injuries and was trapped by debris that couldn't be moved safely without specialized equipment. She would need to stabilize the victim's condition and prepare them for a difficult extraction process. Working in the dark, cramped space with limited supplies, Sarah drew on every aspect of her medical training and her systematic approach to problem solving. She improvised splinting materials from debris, used her clothing to create pressure bandages, and established an IV line under conditions that would have been challenging in a fully equipped hospital. Throughout the 30-minute rescue operation, Sarah maintained constant communication with her team, providing updates on the victim's condition and coordinating the complex extraction process. Her calm, professional demeanor helped keep the entire team focused and organized despite the pressure of the situation. When the victim was finally extracted and stabilized for transport, the simulation entered its final phase. The team had successfully rescued all victims, but they now faced the challenge of safely evacuating everyone from the unstable building while accounting for all personnel and equipment. Sarah took charge of the final headcount and evacuation procedures, ensuring that no team members or victims were left behind in the confusion of the massive operation. Her systematic approach and attention to detail proved crucial in preventing the kind of oversight that could be catastrophic in a real emergency. As the simulation concluded and the team gathered for debriefing, Sarah felt a profound sense of Accomplishment. She had not only survived the most challenging test of the entire training program, but she had excelled in a leadership role that utilized all of her strengths while minimizing the impact of her physical limitations. Captain Rodriguez conducted individual evaluations with each recruit, providing detailed feedback on their performance throughout the final simulation. When Sarah's turn came, she sat across from him with a mixture of confidence and anticipation, knowing that this conversation would determine whether her months of hard work had been successful. Martinez, Captain Rodriguez began, consulting his extensive notes from the simulation. Your performance today was exceptional. You demonstrated outstanding leadership under pressure, excellent technical skills, and the kind of creative problem-solving that separates good rescuers from great ones. He continued with specific examples of her contributions during the simulation, noting her medical expertise, her coordination abilities, and her willingness to take on the most dangerous assignments when her skills made her the logical choice. More importantly, he concluded, you've shown tremendous growth throughout this program. You came in with physical challenges that many people saw as insurmountable obstacles, but you turned those challenges into opportunities to develop other strengths. You've proven that determination and intelligence can overcome almost any limitation. Sarah felt tears of joy beginning to form in her eyes, but she maintained her composure as Captain Rodriguez delivered the news she had been hoping to hear for 3 months. Congratulations, Martinez. You've not only passed the program, but you've finished in the top 3 of your class. Welcome to the Elite Rescue Squad. 6 months after graduation, Sarah Martinez stood in the equipment bay of Station 7, preparing for what would become one of the most significant rescues of her early career with the Elite Squad. The call had come in at 3:47 a.m., a construction accident at a downtown building site where a worker was trapped beneath heavy machinery in a confined space that rescue teams couldn't access with conventional equipment. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah as she suited up alongside her teammates. The same physical characteristics that had made her seem unsuitable for rescue work during training were now making her the only team member capable of reaching the trapped victim. Her smaller stature and experience with confined spaces made her the logical choice for a rescue that would have been impossible for her larger colleagues. As the rescue team arrived at the scene, Sarah quickly assessed the situation. The victim was conscious but trapped beneath a piece of machinery that had shifted during an equipment malfunction. The space was too narrow for the other rescue team members to access, and the structural instability of the surrounding area made it dangerous to use heavy equipment to widen the opening. Captain Rodriguez, who now served as Sarah's direct supervisor on the Elite Squad, looked at the scene and turned to her with complete confidence. This is your call, Martinez. What do you need from us? The transformation in their relationship was remarkable. The man who had once questioned whether she belonged in the program now trusted her judgment completely and deferred to her expertise in situations where her unique skills were required. More significantly, her teammates showed none of the skepticism and doubt that had characterized her early training experiences. Marcus Thompson, who had been her partner during the wilderness survival exercise, was now a permanent member of her squad. As she prepared to enter the confined space, he helped her check her equipment and communication systems with the easy familiarity of a trusted colleague. The respect between them was mutual and genuine, built through shared experiences and proven competence. As Sarah made her way through the narrow passage toward the trapped victim, she reflected on how much had changed since those early days of training, when her every movement was scrutinized and criticized. Her limp was still there, as noticeable as ever, but it had ceased to define how others saw her professional capabilities. Her colleagues valued her for her medical expertise, her problem-solving abilities, and her courage under pressure. The rescue operation took nearly 2 hours to complete, requiring Sarah to work in cramped conditions while coordinating with her team to safely extract both herself and the victim. When she finally emerged from the debris with the injured worker secured for transport, a crowd of construction workers, emergency personnel, and media representatives had gathered at the scene. As Sarah helped load the victim into the ambulance, she overheard one of the construction supervisors talking to a reporter. "I couldn't believe it when I saw her going in there," he said, gesturing toward the collapsed area. "She's so small, and she walks with a limp, but she went into that space, without hesitation. Nobody else could have reached him." The reporter's interest was piqued, and she approached Sarah as the ambulance was pulling away. "I understand you were the only rescuer who could access the victim. Can you tell us about the rescue?" Sarah answered the questions professionally, focusing on the technical aspects of the operation and praising her team's support throughout the challenging extraction. She didn't mention her disability or the early doubts about her capabilities, but the reporter had clearly noticed her limp and was curious about her background. The story that appeared in the next day's newspaper focused on the successful rescue, but it also highlighted Sarah's journey from a nursing background to the elite rescue squad. The article mentioned her physical challenges without sensationalizing them, instead emphasizing how her unique combination of medical expertise and determination had made her an invaluable asset to the rescue team. Within days, Sarah began receiving messages from young people with disabilities who had seen the news coverage. Some were aspiring first responders who had been told their physical limitations would prevent them from pursuing their dreams. Others were simply looking for inspiration and proof that their own challenges didn't have to define their potential. One message particularly touched Sarah. It came from a teenage girl named Emma who had been born with a condition that affected her mobility. Emma wrote that she had always wanted to become a paramedic, but had been discouraged by teachers and family members who thought her disability would make it impossible. Seeing Sarah's story had convinced her to pursue her dream despite the obstacles. Sarah realized that her journey had become about more than just her own personal achievement. She had inadvertently become a symbol of what was possible when determination and preparation met with opportunity. The girl who had once sat alone at lunch while her classmates mocked her limp was now inspiring others to pursue their own dreams, despite similar challenges. At the next training session for new rescue squad recruits, Captain Rodriguez asked Sarah to speak to the incoming class about the realities of rescue work and the diverse skills needed for success in the field. As she stood before the 25 new recruits, Sarah saw some of the same expressions she remembered from her own first day: confidence, nervousness, determination, and in a few cases, skepticism about whether certain individuals belonged in the program. Among the new recruits was a young man with a prosthetic leg, a woman who was noticeably smaller than most of her classmates, and several others who didn't fit the traditional image of a rescue worker. Sarah could see the doubt in some of the other recruits' eyes as they assessed their classmates, just as her own abilities had once been questioned. 3 months ago, Sarah began, most of you would have looked at me and assumed I wasn't cut out for this work. Some of you might be thinking the same thing about your classmates right now. Let me tell you what I've learned about what really matters in rescue work. She spoke about the importance of preparation, systematic thinking, and the willingness to turn perceived weaknesses into strengths. She emphasized that successful rescue operations required diverse skills and that teams performed best when they included members with different backgrounds and capabilities. Your job, she concluded, is not to prove that you're the strongest or the fastest. Your job is to become so competent at what you do that when someone's life depends on your skills, you're the person everyone wants on their team. After her presentation, several recruits approached Sarah with questions about the training program and their own concerns about succeeding. The young man with the prosthetic leg thanked her for showing that physical differences didn't have to be career-ending obstacles. The smaller woman asked for advice about building the confidence to compete with larger, stronger classmates. As Sarah answered their questions and shared her experiences, she realized that her most important contribution to the rescue squad might not be the operations she performed in the field, but the example she set for others who faced similar challenges. Her success was proof that excellence could come in many forms, and that the most valuable team members were often those who had to work hardest to prove themselves. 6 months later, when the next class graduated from the training program, 4 of the recruits who had seemed like unlikely candidates on the first day were among the top performers. The young man with the prosthetic leg finished second in his class, while the smaller woman earned the highest scores in technical skills and emergency procedures. At the graduation ceremony, Captain Rodriguez made a point of recognizing not just the individual achievements of the graduates, but the changing culture of the rescue squad itself. "We've learned that strength comes in many forms," he said, looking directly at Sarah in the audience. "The best rescue teams are those that recognize and utilize the full range of human capabilities and talents." As Sarah watched the new graduates receive their certifications, she thought about how much had changed since her own graduation day. The program was now actively recruiting candidates from diverse backgrounds, and the training had been modified to better accommodate different physical capabilities while maintaining the rigorous standards that ensured competence and safety. Yodida, a woman who had once been told she didn't belong, had not only found her place but had helped create space for others who faced similar challenges. Her limp was still there, as noticeable as ever, but it had become just one characteristic among many that defined her as a person and a professional. Sarah Martinez had proven that true strength wasn't measured by physical perfection, but by the determination to excel despite obstacles and the courage to help others do the same. In the end, the people who had laughed at her limp during training had learned the most important lesson of all, that underestimating someone based on their apparent limitations was often the biggest mistake they could make.